This next article from the Times of Israel, 13 extremist groups charged in plot to kidnap Michigan governor to spark a civil war. The alleged scheme involved months of planning, rehearsals to snatch Governor Gretchen Whitmer from her vacation home. Suspects aiming to incite uprisal linked to the Boogaloo group. U.S. agents foiled the stunning plot to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Authorities said Thursday in announcing the charges were in an alleged scheme that involved months of planning, even rehearsals to snatch her from her vacation home. 6 men were charged in federal court with conspiring to kidnap the governor in reaction to what they viewed as uncontrolled power, according to the federal complaint. And we just went over in the prior video about how the Governor Whitmer's, what were the executive orders, were unlawful, that she exceeded the powers that were given to her by the legislator, and she overrided the powers of the legislator. And so the Boogaloo people, they don't understand like the different, what far right and far left means. There's like, this left versus right politics came from the French Revolution. On the left, you have flat social hierarchies. On the right, you have non-flat social hierarchies. The farthest left is communism, with the flattest social hierarchy of 4, farmers at the bottom, artisans above them, soldiers above them, and then the government at the top. Then on the right, you'll find your conservatives, which who conserve the current power structure and social hierarchies as is. And the justification behind this is that in order to rise up the social hierarchy, if it's just given to you, you're not going to respect it. So you have to earn your way up the social hierarchy. And if we just flatten the social hierarchy, then it just takes the money from the people who tried really hard to give it to people who didn't try very hard. And so what's the point of even trying hard and rising up the social hierarchy and gaining power if somebody's just going to come and take it all away from you and give it to somebody who didn't work, who doesn't like you? This doesn't make any sense. So I sit in that camp of people because I definitely believe in capitalism. So on the farthest right, you have Nazism, fascism, and Sharia law, which is often excluded by people. Sharia law is far right because it has a steep social hierarchy where the Muslims are at the top and non-Muslims are treated as subhuman. They're treated as infidels, and they're often executed, tortured. This is the definition of far right. So the definition of far right was expanded by the liberals and by the Chinese Nazi Party through the assistance of their state-run propaganda in order to include as many people as possible, because what they do is they change the definitions of words by changing what context they're appropriate in, and they change the orders in which events happened in order to enforce their narrative. They'll start with one fact. So they'll, for instance, if you're going to try to brainwash someone, what you have to do is you have to find a point where you guys agree at. I don't want to say brainwash. Also to debate, if you're going to win a debate. But it can go extreme with brainwashing. You have to find a point where you agree with. So do you agree these two things happen? Or like, okay, yes, I agree that. Okay, well then you also have to agree also that this thing is also true because this thing is true. And so you can use translatory logic in order to move the person from one belief system into another belief system slowly. And eventually you can get them to believe batshit crazy stuff by brainwashing them, by controlling the facts that they see. So Wikipedia has been taken over by the far left. They've expanded the definition of far right. So there's different kinds of anti-government extremist. On the far left, you have your communist anti-government extremists, which want to overthrow the government with communism. On the far right, you have your fascist extremist and your radical Islamic terrorists who want to overthrow the world with fascism or Sharia law. And then you have, in the middle, you have reactionary anti-government people. And then they can go left or right too. But a reactionary anti-government extremist thinks that the current government is not legitimate and that we have to restore the government to a prior state. Definition of a reactionary is that they think that the current world is not, or social system is not right. The old one was good, so we need to return back to an older state. So this can mean a number of different things, being a reactionary, but it's been labeled as far right. All of it has been labeled as far right, which is incorrect. The Boogaloo movement is technically a centrist party or centrist anti-government extremists. They believe that the current government, a lot of them will be QAnon people. QAnon people aren't all on the right. A lot of QAnon people are also too on the left. There's a lot of conspiracy theorists on all sides of the political spectrum that believe a wide variety of nonsense for ridiculous reasons. The Boogaloo movement group of people is kind of like a little bit loosely affiliated, like the 4chan message boards where people, a lot of it's just jokes where they're trolling people. And then sometimes they'll start to develop these insane conspiracy theories. That happens from time to time. Some of it's a joke. Sometimes you get some schizophrenic person who's like on one and they're definitely off the rocker. And then people will judge everybody in that group based upon the one wingnut. So I don't think that's really fair to say. Read on in the article separately, 7 other linked to paramilitary groups in the Wolverine Watchmen were charged in state court for allegedly seeking to storm the Michigan Capitol to start a civil war. If you want to ruin your group's name, storm the Capitol. That's something that I learned from the quote-unquote far-right protests in Europe, the anti-lockdown, anti-mask protest, is that once you, because they had some people storm the Reichstag there, and it just completely destroyed their movement's name. Very bad for their movement to do that, because people associated them with the far right, like the real far right, like not just like somebody who they're saying is sexist and racist and xenophobic and nativist or reactionary, or they're a theist. Like they want the government to be the same religion as them, like the Israelis. They're far right. It's like, all right, this is just nonsense. Like if the Israelis are far right, the Muslims are far right, the Nazis are far right. This doesn't make any sense. At a certain point, it's just like, this is the problem with expanding and liberalizing definitions, is words have meanings. They've been around for a long time. And then when you start to change the meaning, which a lot of people who live in big cities will use slang, and then these terms start to mean different things, but other people still think they mean the same thing. And then people go insane. Surveillance for the kidnapping plot took place in August and September, according to the FBI affidavit. 4 of the men planned to meet Wednesday to make a payment on explosives and exchange tactical gear. FBI quoted, "One of the men were wearing Whitmer has no checks and balances at all. She's uncontrolled She has uncontrolled power right now. All good things must come to an end. Authorities said plots were stopped with the works of undercover agents and informants. Men were arrested Wednesday night. 6 charged in federal court face up to life in prison if convicted. State terrorism charges on the other 7 men carry a possible 20-year sentences. Andrew Burrs, the U.S. attorney in Western Michigan, called the men violent extremists. Yep, definitely. Quote, all of us in Michigan can disagree about politics, but those disagreements should never amount to violence. Violence has been prevented today, Detroit U.S. Attorney Matthew Schneider told reporters. A few hours later, Whitmer pinned some blame on the U.S. President Donald Trump because he's like responsible for everything. It's like Donald Trump's fault that the people don't like COVID lockdowns and they want to take the governor out. Which, if you didn't notice, that's the governor on the other side of the car over there, and the car is not moving. Obviously, because the flag is not waving. It's like standing still. So, I don't know. I should have put some more protesters in there stopping the car. Didn't think about that. So she's always, she said, noting that he did not condemn, or President Trump didn't condemn white supremacists in the week's debate with Joe Biden. Instead, told the far-right groups to stand back and stand by. They're referring to Proud Boys, which aren't a far-right group. They're just saying these people are a far-right group because they fight the far left. They say if you're against communism, that you're far-right. They're like, oh no, Antifa just means that you're against fascism. Right. But then if you go on Wikipedia, it says right here that anti-communist also means that you're far right. That's because Wikipedia has been taken over by the far left. And anybody who fights the far right is, or sorry, anybody who fights the far left is the far right. And that's the way that they work. That's how they've always worked. They change definitions. They include people. So it starts out, they're just targeting the bourgeoisie, and then they expand the definition of what bourgeoisie means, and then it just becomes an attack where people can use it because it works, and they win when they use it. And that's what's the problem. That's called weaponized left-right politics right there. When you've taken words that, like, when you use them, they turn into pejoratives and they cause harm to people. And then you become glowing radioactive toxic with your behavior. It's all because you're failing to understand all these definitions, and that Wikipedia is not legit. Like, people, all kinds of people go onto Wikipedia and they see this shit and they think, oh, so that means that anything that has aspects like anything that has an aspect of ultra-nationalist, chauvinistic, which means patriotic, there's different than male chauvinism. Male chauvinism is like where you have excessive pride in your in being a male, And then that includes misogyny and xenophobic, theocratic, racist, homophobic, transphobic, anti-communist, reactionary. This last reactionary is just a catch-all for any conservative. If you don't like what the liberals are doing and you want it to be, you thought it was working great before, we should just go back to that. Now you're reactionary. So this puts just about, most people in America in the far right pile at some point. All the Jews are in there, all the Israelis. And what about that? So then you end up getting large groups of people on the far right. Like, it wouldn't even be a big deal if they wouldn't weaponize. Like, if they didn't make it such a big deal, it wouldn't be so popular. It's like the more they try to shut these people down, the more Antifa Nazi riots they have, the larger the group of far right gets. This is a problem. This is not what you want. You don't want to continue to grow the far right pile until you have a massive, huge number of far right people. This is the last thing that you want to do. You want to make people moderate and centrist. Like, it's not a good thing to create these battles between the two groups. But who's starting all these battles? All these people with this far left radicalized Wikipedia stuff and the far left universities. I do blame the universities and the Wikipedia for a lot of this radicalization, because the more you create these two camps where they're diametrically opposed to each other, the more conflicts you're going to get, and you're going to get deep-rooted hatred when people start killing each other. Because once people think that their tribe has been targeted, then they can justify killing one of your tribe because it's retribution. And then this can escalate into wars. And this is the problem with the whole Boogaloo thing, is that it's a lot of it's stoked by these far leftist people who are young people who are still believing that socialism could work because they don't know enough about the world to know that socialism is just evil. And then they go out to all these protests, and they're like protesting for equality, and they get into these Marxist movements because there's a bunch of people that out there at these protests who are pushing Marxism in the Antifa community. And they start to get people's phone numbers when they're out at these riots. And then they start to develop networks via social media. And then now they have a massive network of people who are connected with phone numbers and everything. And then we get a lot of conflicts that start to generate from this. A few hours later, hold on. It says, quote, hate groups heard the president's words not as a rebuke, but as a rallying cry, as a call to action, end quote, Whitmer said. Well, I don't think so. My own observation when I saw that was that he's not going to bow down and kiss your ring when you're using racism as an attack. So Democrats are just using racism as an attack because it works to attack people with. Because people agree with it. They focus group this stuff. They get a bunch of people from the city who are undecided voters, and they focus group test their messages to see which ones the people respond to the most, and which one gets them talking and brings their friends in. Then they go with those policies. And one of the policies that they've tested that works the best is calling the white man racist. And when you do this, it's nice and easy way for them to control the big cities, but there's a lot of consequences to that. We end up with riots. We end up with people believing they're in different camps, that they think everything that the other side believes is fake, and that their side is the side of right, and then both sides think the same thing. So then they start warring with each other, and then once people start dying, people start getting killed. Now you have names that they could chant, like like they chant Breonna Taylor or George Floyd or Mike Brown. And then they make these stories where, like, if you don't believe the story, if you don't believe hands up, don't shoot, the whole Ferguson, Missouri thing with Mike Brown, then you're racist. Like, because to them, they think it's white supremacists who control the media, who are pushing this false narrative, and that we are a brainwashed part of a cult, that because we believe all of these things and they're all fake. The reality is that it's Democrats who do this, and it's a bunch of stupid liberals who believe a whole bunch of whack nonsense. Most of them live in the big cities. And so the Boogaloo thing is code for electronic boogeyman campaign. This is where you use atrocity propaganda to paint the other side as the boogeyman. And this allows you to start riots through use of what is called run boogeyman propaganda, where you create a perception that there's few of us and many of the boogeymen. And so we have to run because we can't defend ourselves. And then they can turn this through the perception and the propaganda that people are uniting and there's lots of us. They can mislead you on the popularity of something in order to make you think that there's many of us and then few of them. And then they can cause riots where they can get people to actually target and kill police officers using these methods. So it's not just the Boogaloo people. This is what I'm trying to get at. I know this is a long tangent. It's not just the Boogaloo people that are being bad here. It's the left and the right. It takes two to tango. It's not just the far right causing a problem. Far right doesn't exist without a far left. If there's no liberals and mobs of poor people who are trying to flatten the social hierarchy by taking everything from the people at the top, you don't have any far right people. But because there's a lot of poor people that would like to take all the resources from the rich people and say that they're racist, we end up with this vast spectrum of people with who are on a vast spectrum of beliefs in different dimensions. It's not just flat social hierarchy versus steep social hierarchy. There's capitalist versus socialist and other dimensions along that make it really just confusing to say these things. And so people don't understand the definitions of things. And because of this, they get upset when other people aren't sharing the same definition that they're using. And then we get a lot of these conflicts. Whitmer, who is also considered as Biden's running mate, was also widely praised for her response to the coronavirus. She also sharply criticized by Republican lawmakers and people in conservative areas of the state. Capitol has been site for many riots. I think the majority of the rest of this is kind of fluff. Let's look at some videos. Here's the video of the dude, one of the kidnappers.
It amazes me that people actually believe that. No, Trump is not your friend, dude. And it amazes me that people actually believe that when he's shown over and over and over again that he's a tyrant. Every single person that works for government is your enemy, dude.
So obviously they're not just far right. So this guy, you can see an anarchy. This is a Brandon Caserta. Caserta, one of the ringleaders of the group of men arrested for the plot where the group planned to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer. This is from Robbie Starbuck. Here's another video of him.
They were literally violently thrown out of there. Okay. Now, they weren't violently thrown out of there by any of the bureaucrats or politicians. That's not who did it. It wasn't a lawmaker who threw them out. Okay? It wasn't a governor. You know, it wasn't a secretary of state. It was an order-following police officer. Okay? And I'm going to show you some case law right now that will kind of guide you to the realization that these order followers are not here to protect you at all. And I really, really, really want to try to get you to understand that, because you are not going to achieve freedom by continuing to support these people under the erroneous belief that they're here to protect you. That's just incorrect, and we can prove this.
So obviously you can see there's an anarchy sign behind this guy. Most people don't know what anarchy actually means. They think it just means that there's like chaos. That's not actually true. Anarchist is the farthest possible left system that you can have that isn't a system. It's where there's no hierarchy at all. And it can only exist in very, very small groups of people. But it's been shown that beyond some very small number of people, like 5 people, you can't have anarchy. So this guy is definitely certifiably a far leftist, not far right, and he's one of the ringleaders. So this is why we can't really say that these people are far right, because the people exist on a spectrum. There's one common theme behind the Boogaloo people, or that they think that the government is extremely corrupt. They're anti-government extremist, and then some people who thought the memes were funny too. There's always going to be some wingnuts in every crowd. Another one, same one. 3 of the same. I don't know why those were all.
Of Independence was the Declaration of Independence was an anarchist document. It was a document that said you don't own me.
That's my anarchy, bro.
It was a document that said you're not the boss of me. That's an anarchist document. Anarchy does not mean chaos, but the Constitution after that, which James Madison and a couple other people, or no, maybe it wasn't James Madison. I think he was a Federalist. It was a couple of the founding fathers. Thomas Paine was one of them that said they didn't like the Constitution because what it did was created a ruling class. The Declaration of Independence was an...
I think there's a misconception with a social hierarchies being a bad thing. I think it's these people just think oh, we'll just destroy the social hierarchy and then everybody will be better off. This is delusional. Absolutely delusional. Because humans naturally form social hierarchies. You can't get rid of the social hierarchies because you'll just end up with communism where you have a incredibly corrupt party ruling the state, single party that controls everything, and it'll just fall apart. It'll rip apart under its own internal forces because You need markets. You need to be able to purchase, exchange capital without having to bring another person in on the deal. The problem with having socialism is when you don't have money, how exactly do you trade resources with each other? You have to get another person involved. I can't just like give you money and then get the stuff and then leave. We have to get another person involved. So this creates extra overhead. You can get good deals. Theoretically, you could get, like, I could show up with a bunch of steel and then trade it for some oil and some coal. Or I can show up with a bunch of wheat and then I could trade it for some medicine. It's like, that's very complicated. That like businesses are run asynchronously. They're not, when you synchronize a bunch of businesses together, you are going to kill their profits. The only way that you can get good profits is by making your business asynchronous so you can scale it high. Hold on. You can get good profits other ways, but massive amounts of profit. If you want to scale up a business to be very large, it can't be synchronous. And that's the problem with socialism. And these anarchy systems are like, they're just based off these like really simplistic concepts of what, oh yeah, it would be nice if I didn't have a boss. But I personally don't have a boss. I am my own boss and it's hard. It's way easier when there's a boss who can just tell you what to do and you can just show up to work and get your paycheck. And it's a lot easier to rise up and to be way more productive and use that productivity in order to make yourself and your family better off so that your children can even rise higher up the social hierarchy than you. So obviously an anarchist is diametrically opposed to this notion of hierarchies. So this guy can't be far right. Here's another one.
And that by you participating, and you got to understand certain things like that. And you got to understand that by you participating in the government, you know, you are participating in slavery, dude, for everyone else. That's what you're doing, and that's wrong. That's wrong. By you voting and supporting any politician and giving any sanction to the government at all is admitting that you believe in the legitimacy of authority, which means that you believe in the legitimacy of slavery.
That doesn't make any sense, dude. Obviously, this guy's never worked out on a farm and tried to make everything himself without having other people to help. I don't know if you've... I've experienced building a lot of stuff on my own, and it's really difficult when you don't have other groups of people that you can just like pay to do things. Like a lot of times you think people just like they won't hire somebody who charges more because they're trying to skimp on the labor a little bit. But a lot of times you're a lot better off hiring somebody who does charge more, but they do it a lot and they're very good at it. The quality of product that you're going to get out of that person is a lot higher than the person who's working for cheaper, but it's not something that they do all the time. In order to do this, you have to have a hierarchy of people that are training, where you have teachers and you have students. And there's going to be some that are better at the job than others, and they're going to have different pay scales. And if you want to get... if you want to be your best, you're going to have to be really good at something. This is something that I had a problem with my startups, is that I tried to do too many things. And from doing too many things, there's a lot of overhead. And those overheads, there's a lot of different like movements that you got to do. Like if you're assembling a product, and if you don't put the product together right, you can cause a lot more manual labor in the assembly. So you have to like put it together with the final product in mind, where you can it's built in such a way that it's easy to test and to put the product together, and you can do it very quickly so that you can put out as many as possible. And in order to do that, you have to have a bunch of people who have different pay scales, and there's going to be a boss, and that boss is going to know a lot more about doing the job than you. And you, as a young person, the only way that you're going to get in is at the bottom. You're not going to just walk in and then just be at the top of this place where people make a lot of money and they've been working for long hours for many years to get to where they're at. You can't get that. It doesn't work, dude. That's not the world that we live in. Anarchy absolutely cannot exist in a workplace, because you have to have a boss that's gonna make your people productive. Whenever you have a bunch of people communicating, so if you take a circle and you put 3 nodes in it and you connect each other, how many nodes you get? You get 3 nodes, or is it 4? 1, 2, 4, 6. There's 6 communication nodes just in a triangle. And then you put 4 in, and then each one has in like a square. Each of the corners of the square has 3 connections. So there's like 1, 2, and 3. I wish I had my document camera so I could draw it, but I don't have it. And so there's 4 of them. So there's 12 different nodes that you can connect. If you have 5 people on a team, then you have each person can communicate to 4 different people. And there's 5 of them. So there's 20 different communication nodes. If you have 6 different people, each person can communicate to 5 different people, and there's 6 of them. So there's 30 different communication nodes here. As these groups of people get larger and larger and larger, this gets exponentially more complicated to get all of these people to actually work together. At that point in time, you start just throwing money out the window with wasted productivity. And because of this, you need to pay somebody good money who's going to come in and make sure that your business runs right. Right? Because that just makes sense, right? That's the way businesses work. And the anarchist people, these people just want to just disregard everything about the way the world works by saying that, like, that having a social hierarchy and a way to ascend up to the top of the business is a bad thing. That's absolutely not a bad thing. Obviously, this dude's a wingnut, so whatever.
Has arrested another cop for violating his oath. The only time you can find a good cop arresting a bad cop is for, like, drunk driving or something like that. You know? And even then, they're so light on them, and half the time they get away. They get away with it. Alright? This is a violent gang, okay? That has each other's back, and they're organized. Alright? You need to understand that. Because if you want freedom, you need to know who the people are that are taking your rights. If you say, I want freedom, but you're supporting the people that are taking your freedom away, you're not going to get freedom, man. You got to know who the enemy is. All right? Not a single
have created. Why? Because the boomers have created the American family, have destroyed the American family. They've destroyed the system that used.
I'm going to come in with some World War II Nazi parallels, because I've done a fair amount of study in that region. One of the biggest dangers is when you have two competing sides in a country that they're in they're tribes, and there's extremist groups, and then those two extremist groups, they start to unite, or the extremist groups in both of the tribes who have conflicts with each other, they then start to join together. So you have a government, and then whenever you have the two tribes start to coordinate with each other, that's what happened in Nazi Germany. The far left started to coordinate with the far right. There was a lot of people on a broad spectrum in Germany before World War II broke out. Germany was not anti-Semitic or racist right before World War II broke out. Berlin was the most racially tolerant city in the world at that point in time because Germans never owned slaves. And then very quickly, the political climate changed to very anti-Semitic when they started believing conspiracy theories. The people who came out, so there were street fights between the fascists and the communists. The Antifa flag started, I don't know exactly where they started. I do know it was in the German Communist Party before World War II. They were using those Antifa symbols with the black and the red flag. And whenever Hitler started bringing out groups of people, Hitler brought out groups of people that they all agreed with each other. Hitler won by a landslide. And it's because he united people with hatred. So one thing that you can point out about this guy is like, okay, well, he's on the far left. He's an anarchist. He's as far left as you get. And then he's talking about traditional family structures here. And so also, too, people have this assumption that like Nazis were, they believed in a traditional family structure where women were making more soldiers for the fatherland. And that if you also believe in traditional family structure, that makes you like a fascist. Because this is the way they work is with comparisons. But really, in reality, they were actually first-wave feminists. Fascists came to power on the women's suffrage movement, and they gave women voting rights in 1918 in Germany. Shortly after that, they elected fascists, and Hitler brought out a broad coalition of people from anti-liberals to communists to first-wave feminists, the whole spectrum. He won by a landslide. This was the thing that was so dangerous about Hitler, was when they combined their ideologies into one that was against the government. They didn't believe that the elected officials were working for the people, and that it was an emergency, and that there was an enemy threat, and that this enemy threat had to be neutralized. And so this justified them overthrowing the government because of this threat. This is the very essence of why these anti-government extremists are a threat, is because this is a explosively deadly ideology.
To be when dad would go to work or mom would go to work and dad or mom would stay home with the kids. When it didn't take two people to raise a family. To support a family, sorry. When people actually had time to take off and not have to work 4 jobs just so they can actually afford insurance on their cars. Listen, driving's not a privilege. I'm sick and tired of hearing that driving is a privilege, driving is a right. Driving is now a necessity and a way of life. You tell the people in the inner cities that want to get away from the inner cities to get that better job, and that job happens to be where a bus doesn't run. If they don't have a car, they can't better their life. So you can't tell me that it's a what's the word I'm looking for?
Privilege.
It's a privilege. It's not a privilege. It's a necessity. It's a way of life. And you made it that way. You made it that way. So now you got to change your way of... And listen, all these other places, they don't have insurance on their cars. Okay, listen, you're robbing people through the insurance companies. So that's what you boomers are doing. You're robbing your families. You've destroyed the American family from what it used to be. So that's what the boomers done.
I don't think the boomers did that. I think the boomers didn't teach us good enough. There was a lot of single moms, but it's not really their fault. They don't know these things. Who wants to die single without a husband or wife? Most people would say no. So the primary predictor of African Americans being in poverty is that they come from a single mom. The poverty rates of two-parent African American homes have been in the single digits almost my entire life. So obviously racism isn't the primary factor at determining African American socioeconomic status. It definitely seems as though their father being around and is the primary thing, like just being taught how to be a man. So I think the women can't do everything, you know. They need the men to like carry the weight. So yeah, I mean, this guy says a lot of stuff that a lot of people would agree with. That's the problem with a lot of far leftist and anti-government extremists. It's not that you don't agree with them. It's that you do agree with them and they want to hurt people. That's pretty much the gist of why these people are dangerous. People like to say, oh, these people are dangerous because they believe these things. Here's a women's march down here in DC. I started playing it, so let's watch it. That's very large. Wasn't somebody hurt? I think a woman was violently assaulted at this protest. I couldn't find the story though. Are there any pink pussy hats? I see some pink pussy hats. I'm not a big fan of identity politics. I think that we should be working in the majority of people's interest. And working in the majority of people's interest, you wouldn't want to just give more money to rich white women. That, in my mind's eye, is kind of pointless. If you're trying to help everybody else out, why are you sucking the oxygen out of the room with all of these women's marches and racism? It's because it's a voting tactic. They can get people out to the polls. It's all a bunch of bullshit. What else we got on these radicals? Here we saw that one. I don't know why there were so many of those out there. Here's Trump's response here. Trump tweeted on October 8th, Governor Whitmer of Michigan has done a terrible job. She locked down her state for everyone except her husband's boating activities. The federal government provided tremendous help to the great people of Michigan. My Justice Department and federal law enforcement announced ... Today, he foiled a dangerous plot against Governor Whitmer. Rather than say thank you, she calls me a white supremacist. While Biden and Democrats refuse to condemn Antifa, anarchists, looters that burn down Democrat-run cities, i.e. the black looter mob Antifa Nazis, or Blamen. Continuing on in Trump's tweet, I do not tolerate any extreme voices defending all Americans, even those who oppose and attack me, is what I will always do as your president. Governor Whitmer, open up your state, open up your schools, open up your churches. I love Donald Trump for this stuff because this is, if you ask me, I think that the stuff that Donald Trump's been standing up for is the stuff that really actually matters. Before Donald Trump came along, it was just business as usual in the swamp. People would, they're just basically trying to pay voters to get them to vote for them on the left. And they want to use this racism thing to attack white Americans because it works, and then most people aren't racist, and they don't want to be labeled as a white supremacist because that in today's society is like a pejorative. It's like being called a pedophile. It'll ruin your life if they call you a white supremacist on the internet. You'll be wanting to kill yourself after you can't find a job because they've labeled you as toxic. And once you're canceled, what do you do after this? This is the problem with the left, is their strategy, it never is able to actually see the forest for the trees. They can never actually get past, like, what's the next step? Like, all right, so you slandered all the white people as racist, and you took everybody's white privilege, and now white people are the minority of people in the country. So now we've lost our wealth, and then what happened? Well, did we lose our wealth? Like, what happened is, after white people are a minority in America, does that mean like we're poor and we're going to be living in the ghettos? Is it going to flip? Like, what? How is this change of power going to happen? Because it hasn't happened. The average age of white people is 58. Average age of minorities are about 28 now. And so really quickly, our population is going to get real small. And then what happens? Like an armed conflict or something? Like, what's is it? Do the Democrats finally get the race war that they've been foaming at the mouth since the days when Democrats started the KKK? Is it really like, is that what they've been going for this entire time? But it's like, so they're guilty of doing the exact same thing that they're saying Trump's doing. So they're saying that Donald Trump, he's bad because he didn't condemn Proud Boys, because he said stand back and stand by. And then what do? They don't condemn Antifa or anarchist. They don't want it. They want these people to vote for them. They're both doing the exact same thing. And the pot is calling the kettle black. And really, we're all the victims, because now you've made it. Now there's a system set up to where you can't make any sort of policies that help white people out. All of the policies have to help non-whites out. That turns into anti-white racism. Really, we should be working in the majority of best people's interest. Sorry, the majority of people's best interest. And then the majority of people will help the minority people out. We just have to ensure there's no structural racism. But whenever we're focusing on trying to help minorities in the big cities, it's like, we don't live in the big cities, dude. Why are you sucking all of the oxygen out of the room with this white supremacy nonsense? It's because the argument wins. They can just label you as a white supremacist, and when they do that, they don't actually have to have a valid argument. They can just continue to just say, hey, look, the reason why you're not doing so well in the big cities, it isn't because of the high rent, or that you didn't try very hard in school, or that you were too busy partying and doing drugs and having sex. Instead, it's the racist people. It's the privileged white males that are giving out all this free white privilege to all the white males, and then they won't give any privilege to minorities, and they only give a little bit of privilege to the white women. And they keep the women locked up, and they beat them, and they rape them, and they won't let them vote, and they won't let them have friends or go to school or work. And then they put burqas over them. And it's because they're scapegoating. It's just a scapegoat. They're just trying to convince you that it's not actually the people who are in power. They're the ones that are trying to help you. You don't need to take on the people who are actually in power because they're working to help you. So you instead, you want to attack their enemies, their business enemies. If you attack them, then it'll make it so that they can stay in power. And then as long as they're able to control who ascends to the top of the ivory tower, then they're in control of the big cities. It's a power structure scheme that they're just using focus groups. They're getting like independent voters in big cities, and they ask them questions about what pisses them off, what they support, and they're looking for whatever convinces the most people to vote for their side so that they could maintain their power structure. And you end up with this voting demographics. This is a Pew Research study. It says an examination of the 26 electorate based on validated voters. And in here you'll see bars of the different demographics of people and who they voted for. You could see that 91% of black people voted for Democrats, as well as about 2/3 of Hispanics or Latinos. They don't put Asians on here. It's almost all Asians. It's like 98% of Asians. But it's not on here. I wish it was. But it's just like it's more. They're more dogmatic than the African Americans. And so this is why they push these racism policies, is because it gets people to vote for them. This is what they don't care about. The majority of Americans, they recognize the average age of white people is 58, and that very quickly our population is going to collapse. And if they keep bringing in 1 million immigrants per year, then we're going to be a minority group within our lifetimes in our own country. And then once that happens, what happens? There's just like a peaceful transfer of power. There's no power struggles. There's no gang wars. There's no like major wars that are going to go on whenever we exchange powers. It's just going to be peaceful. The white people are just going to say, here, just your country now. We took it from the American Indians. We don't, it's stolen land, so we're just going to give it out to the rest of the world, right? This is the biggest problem with the Democrats, man. The Democrats fundamentally are insanely corrupt. They are insanely corrupt. This to them is normal because they have this institutionalized anti-racism or anti-white racism where they say that white people can't do anything to protect their country or else we'll shame you as a white supremacist. And they're just doing it to get the black vote and the Hispanic votes. And there's very few Asians, and they mostly vote for Democrats too. So it's a power scheme. That's why you can't trust these people. Absolutely cannot trust Democrats at all. This Governor Gretchen Whitmer, she's a Democrat.